On behalf of the United States Indo-Pacific Command, I would like to thank our friends at the National Science and Technology Center for Disaster Reduction and the Suu Kyi Foundation for hosting this one.
那边自己按就好了。好，那边帮他按是不是？我不晓得。绕一圈，绕一圈。 Good morning. How late you work yesterday? 11? No. 12? No. 1 a.m.? No. 2? You burn the midnight oil until 6 o'clock, then have the breakfast directly. Yeah, I already received report from the Omega team, and Alpha team also sent a report, right? So later you will share your report. So for the program for this morning, we will have the 3 keynote speakers. They are all my friends. You know, for disaster management or other field, always need friend and partner. The first speaker today, actually, I always call her my sister. I think at my early days, as being a disaster manager, her words always inspire me because her courage, her activity always lead the community moving forward. Because of her, then I realized humanitarian assistance and disaster relief is not just a book, a paper. We need real action. We need real interaction with each other. So the first speaker of ITW 2021 is Professor Tansari Jamila Mahood. Currently, she is Executive Director, Sunway University, Malaysia, and the Sunway Center for Planetary Health. Oh, my dear participant, maybe you can Google a little bit what is mean the planetary health. Yes, planetary is the adjective of planet. You should Google it, then you realize planetary health is meaningful. Dr. Mahood is the medical professional with more than 2 decades experience managing crisis in health, disaster, and the conflict setting. She is the currently professor and director of the newly established Sunway Center for Planetary Health in Malaysia. He was the special advisor to the Prime Minister of Malaysia on public health from April 2020 to August 2021. She's also a member of the Government Malaysia Economic Action Council and Climate Action Council. Her previous appointment, including Undersecretary General of the Partnership in the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent, IFRC, Chief of the World Humanitarian Summit Secretariat at United Nations. So later we have the chance to hear wonderful speech about her recent idea. So let's welcome Dr. Jamila.
Thank you very much, my dear brother, Dr. Lee, and the NTSC, as well as Zuchi Foundation, an organization I am a huge admirer of, to this wonderful conference. And thank you to all the participants for all your hard work. I understand everyone has been working really hard. So today, allow me to spend some time talking to you about something probably very different. I thought that it would be good to introduce you to planetary health and why it matters in disasters and the humanitarian sector. So I've got someone to help me with the slides. So can you move to the next slide, please? So no continent, country, or community is immune from climate change, and neither are you immune from the impacts of climate change. Next, please. Yeah. As we are all living in the time of COVID right now, and you have to now resort to a hybrid conference. I'm not seeing the slides. That's right. Great. I'm sure we all can appreciate this, that our lives were very much disrupted by a tiny, tiny virus that has traveled around the world. And if we are going to look at aligning COVID-19 recovery with our response to climate change, which does not stop, we are seeing cyclones in Philippines. My own country has had terrible floods. We've seen, all sorts of other natural hazards playing out all around the world, and the world is warming at a very alarming rate. Therefore, we need to align all this, and therefore a chance for us to protect health, promote a sustainable economy, and preserve our planet at the same time. Next, please. Now, if you look at the climate hotspots in the world, and they are the ones in red, you will see the impact of climate change has affected our region, primarily Asia Pacific, but also many other countries around the world, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa and in some parts of North and South America as well. And I deliberately took these slides, Médecins Sans Frontières shared them with me. And if you overlay where they are active, the humanitarian hotspots, they are also the areas that are also equally affected by climate change and climate crises. Next, please. But if you look at two maps, responsibility and vulnerability, if you look at the emissions of CO2, the countries that are in red are the ones that are the highest emitters of CO2, and the ones obviously in green are the lowest. But if you look at the countries that are emitting, they're not the same countries that are having the impact maximally. In fact, on the converse or reverse, the countries that are emitting the least are the ones impacted the most. Next. So we are now living in a world where we are having to deal with two sides of the same coin. And I deliberately focus my talk on climate change because if you look at disasters, I'm sure you have learned over the course of the days of the conference, as well as in your own studies, that disasters, there's no such thing as a natural disaster. You have natural hazards, but they don't necessarily become disasters. The previous slide, please. It doesn't necessarily become disasters unless the community is vulnerable. And therefore, disasters only happen when we create vulnerabilities or we don't address vulnerabilities. So climate change is resulting in a lot of the worst disasters we are facing today. And while we talk about mitigation and adaptation, they're really two sides of the same coin. If you look at mitigation, one of the ways is to reduce emissions, for example. But in the end, we do need to adapt. To adapt, we need to plan for impact. We need to build resilience. And this is where disaster prevention and preparedness becomes really important. We need to improve our response capacity. And at the other hand, you have the geoengineering elements as well. So all this requires scientific assessments, technology development, observations, and research. And therefore, NTSC is so well placed to address all these things and take it from a planetary health perspective as well. And of course, Zucchi Foundation being on the ground first, being one of the most admired humanitarian and organizations in the world, they know, the volunteers know exactly what's going on. And therefore, that building of resilience also starts from community level. Next. So right now, we live in a time of climate change and COVID. I'm sharing some photographs of my own country where, you can't have a lockdown for climate change. You can have one for COVID-19, and then you can't have that lockdown. And the escalation and the cascading crises that occur will further compound our management of a health crisis as well. Next. So some examples, you can Google them. Kyrgyzstan, for example, Médecins Sans Frontières, again, is looking at environmental health projects that examine the health impacts of the extractive industry. So when you start to extract from the ground, there will be environmental impacts, there will be health impacts. We know, for example, many islands in Bangladesh, as well as in the Pacific Oceans and in South Asia, will cease to exist because of rising sea waters, and therefore result in other different types of crises, including climate-related migration. Next. We've seen heat waves and heat-related illnesses and death occurring in Pakistan. We've seen how terrible bushfires have killed not only people, but also wildlife and destroyed many homes and businesses in Australia, for example. And there will be the importance of us looking at meteorological science and climate anticipation in many countries around the world, especially the ones that are very vulnerable, that are also having many challenges, either political, poverty, and so forth. And one such place might be Haiti. Next. In Niger, there are also a lot of shocks happening in a rapidly warming region and also rising waters. And I think, on top of all the difficulties that many countries in Africa face, including cholera that is still rampant in many of the countries around the world, that will also worsen how we look at the impact of climate change, other shocks on some of these health conditions. Next. So just to share that Zuchi Hospital, as you know, is a leader, and I work at the Sunway Group in the Sunway University, and we have taken inspiration from Zuchi Hospital in Taiwan, where there is a race to zero, which means that in our actions to provide health, how do we avert the climate crisis? By committing to a zero emission by 2050. So I think this is just an example of how every profession needs to commit to reducing emissions, to becoming a zero net emitter by 2050, to give us a chance to keep our climate, rather temperature rise below 2 degrees. It's a slim chance, but we all have to do our best. Next. So let me share what we've done in terms of how we also think about our preparedness and our response to crises around the world becoming much more climate friendly, and that is the green response. And we've done this in Bangladesh, where some of the Red Cross societies, for example, made serious planning and execution not to increase the suffering of the people there, and also not to damage further livelihoods, health, and survival of affected people by improving the environmental outcomes of life-saving operations. If any of you have been in the Cox's Bazar area, in the Kotopalu camps and others in Bangladesh, you would have seen the rapid destruction, many football field sizes of forests being cut down every day in order to create some space for these refugees. But what happens is that, as you can see, they live in very vulnerable housing. And when there are no trees and the soil becomes unstable, and high rainfall cause many floods and a lot more destruction. Next, please. So why should we now think about, in disaster prevention and response, a green response, preparedness, and approach, which means that we need to look at, is it necessary to travel and bring out goods? This is why local action becomes very important. Local procurement becomes very important. How do you build human capital that understands the importance of a green response? How do you look at recycling in your response? How do you make sure your packaging of your goods that are going is more green, and reduce the amount of plastics, or find some way to include a recycling project into that? And I think we need to look at legal frameworks. The humanitarian sector needs to look very seriously into a legal framework for the environmental protection and planetary health. And because of value for money, I think environmental protection will actually give you a longer term value for money. And I think this is why we need to really rethink how we look at disaster preparedness and response. And if we align a rights-based approach to how we deliver and prepare for crises, I think then we will be able to manage and navigate the changing environment around us, the many crises that will happen as a result of climate change. And therefore, this whole thinking now, we want to make sure that it's expanded to everyone, particularly young people who are coming into this discipline of disaster preparedness and response, to rethink what that might look like. Next, please. So what really is planetary health that I mentioned earlier? So it's achieving the highest attainable standard of health, well-being, and equity worldwide through judicious attention to political, economic, and social systems. To advance our humanity's well-being and the declining state of the planet Earth, we can no longer ignore the importance of planetary health. And it is a fairly new discipline in sense of its introduction to the general community, but we've all been doing it in some way or other. But the Planetary Health Commission, the Lancet Commission on Planetary Health in 2015 came up with a seminal report that really tells us we need a different approach to how we solve the problems of today and tomorrow. Next. So if you look at health, we always ask people, what does health, where is health created? And if you shut your eyes and think about it, many of you might imagine a hospital, a clinic, a doctor in a white coat. But actually, health should not only be concentrated in that medical care complex, because only 20% of health is produced there. A lot of it, 80%, is outside the medical care complex. The social and environmental factors, back please, account for 55%, behaviors 20%. And haven't we seen this with COVID-19? That until and unless you actually behave differently, you are able to wear a mask, behave differently. Until and unless we acknowledge that this virus didn't appear out of nowhere, that is because of environmental factors and social factors that we've had zoonotic leaks, means the virus jumping from animals to humans. This is why we are in this situation. And without health, nothing moves. Our social life is disrupted, our economies are disrupted, education is disrupted, our whole lives are turned upside down. Next. So just to reintroduce these concepts, because many of you may have heard public health, you may have heard animal health, and the intersection of that called One Health, and then ecological health around that. So planetary health is encompassing. It really is a very important approach to take into consideration all those dimensions I mentioned earlier. To solve health issues and the health of the planet issues as well, we need to have a social, political, economic, justice approach, as well as a health approach to planetary health. Next. So the key messages is that many people in the humanitarian sector, people like me who have been in the sector for such a long time, the needs we're seeing is already starting to outstrip the capacity of governments and global humanitarian actors to respond. Every year, the United Nations comes out with a global humanitarian assistance report and appeal after another, asking for governments to contribute funding because we cannot cope with the emergencies. We know that governments are also retreating from multilateralism and obligations under international and national law. And in the context of both COVID and the climate crisis, this has negative consequences on health, especially to health of the most vulnerable people who I've shared with you earlier. And I think that to maximize efficiency and effectiveness of responses to climate-related disasters, humanitarian actors, including NTSC, ZUCHI, and others, really should integrate hazard mapping, epidemiological, and meteorological forecasting into operations because it's all connected. Next. Yeah, so back please, yeah. So I think you need to leverage emergency experience and technical capacity of humanitarian organizations. There's so many, including ZUCHI, for robust responses in climate disaster prone areas. What we need to do is really build a community that we learn from local emergency responders in climate shock prone countries. We listen to, we build trust, and we collaborate with communities and local actors and experts. Empower frontline staff, increasing access to information, accelerate decentralization, a lot of knowledge, mentoring, and peer support. And this is exactly what Dr. Lee and I have been trying to do for many, many years, really working with partners and like-minded individuals, bringing it from community right up to academia, to technical organizations, international organizations, and governments as well. And I think that it's very important that humanitarian and health responses are now seen collectively. In the past, the health people work on their own, but no, we now need all to work together. And we all also at our own individual and organization levels need to take steps to significantly reduce our own negative impacts on the environment as a matter of urgency. Next. So there are very clear operational frameworks for building climate resilient humanitarian health systems. This is one example. These slides can be left with all of you to look at, but there are many ways that we can use different types of approaches to build these frameworks around us. Next. So let's talk about the elephant in the room. The elephant is always wondering why it's not being seen. And the elephant in the room is really about global politics. It's about local politics. It's about, the need for us to shift some of these important policies and get attention from our global and national and local leaders. I think one way is, through conferences like this, we empower people with a bit more knowledge and curiosity on why it's so important for us to look at a planetary health perspective of things and start engaging, advising, advocating together, because we only have one planet. We're going to have more and more crises in health and climate change, and I think we all need to work together. So this blue elephant actually exists outside the Danish parliament, I think to remind many of the parliamentarians that they can no longer ignore the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is really the climate crisis that's right in front of us right now. Next, please. So I have kept this session fairly tight, but I have time now for some questions and answers, Dr. Lee. So thank you very much again for giving me this opportunity. I wish you all a really productive conference. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Jamila. A very inspiring speech as usual. So from the floor, any question or comment to Dr. Jamila? He talked very broadly about the climate change, health issue, and the green response. Please.
Hi, good morning. My name is Naya, and I like how you ended the latter part, addressing the elephant in the room. And since you've worked within the field of health in the context of climate change, I'm interested in knowing your perspective on this. When we look at health, it's usually conceptualized in terms of environmental health, like vector-borne diseases, dengue fever, etc. Why do you think that over the past few years, although we've acknowledged the mental health impacts of climate change, why hasn't funding and policies on both the national, international, and regional levels considered that aspect? Why is it that health has been conceptualized solely based on environmental health?
That's a very good question. Let me take that one. I think you're spot on that, we look at health sometimes in silos, right? We look at health from, as I mentioned before, it's a clinical health situation. Environmental health is broad, but mental health is one of those aspects of health that is often overlooked. Now, in many parts of the world, including my country, mental health issues are sometimes even stigmatized. People are embarrassed to talk about mental health issues if they are depressed or if they have problems. But I think, I'm an incurable optimist, so let me give you my perspective. I think that in a way, COVID-19 has really exposed to us how vulnerable we are to mental health issues. And many of us, all of us, in fact, who have gone through the pandemic and are still going through it, obviously there's been serious mental health pressures on us. Now, even in a country like mine, where mental health was seen to be, there's something wrong with people with mental health, this has completely changed now. So the government has now acknowledged the importance of mental health, how mental health is also related to pandemics, how it's also related to climate change, how it's also related to the environment and so forth, and has actually started to strengthen policies as well as funding to mental health programs. So if a country like ours can achieve that, I think many countries can. And how did we achieve it? It was young people like you in the room raising your voices. It was the public making aware that, you know, the serious toll of mental health during the pandemic requires us to relook at the whole mental health area. In my country, the suicide rate increased quite dramatically during the pandemic. And very shockingly, many of the suicide cases were actually women. Now, we know that in normal circumstances, women have a higher para-suicide rate, which means they attempt suicide, but they don't die. And it's usually men who have successful, so-called suicides. But I think, you know, the pandemic showed us that there's a very different way and the other complexities that exist. For example, when you're actually stuck with your spouse in the house, there's even more mental health pressures. There are increases in domestic violence. So there are so many layers of complexity and risks and other vulnerabilities that we suddenly see appearing because of, you know, this crisis. So my advice would be really keep raising your voices. The young people, you people in the room, are so important, and we need you to pressure and put, you know, raise all the flags that this has been a very difficult time, but it's not going to end just when the pandemic ends. Mental health issues are real. We're living in a highly stressful environment, competitive. We also are facing serious challenges in the economic and social fronts.
Thank you. Any questions? Please.
Okay. Good morning, Professor. I enjoyed your talk. My question is, since you mentioned about the right-based approach, there are activist movements around the world suing their governments, demanding more rights, protection of environmental rights, and protection of enjoyment, the environment, health, and so on. So what is your view about humanitarian organizations supporting these kinds of activist movements suing their governments?
I sense you're from the Philippines, correct? And you are aware of your wonderful person who sued the government on behalf of dolphins. Are you aware of this? Yeah. Anyway, it's a wonderful story. You need to look at it. There was a Filipino environmentalist who thought about how animals also have rights. I'm just giving you an example so that I can build into what I think your question should, what answer I have for your question. And realize that to protect wildlife for his future generations, he took up a suit against the government when a company wanted to encroach into this wildlife sanctuary for dolphins. And he sued this company and the local government for the rights of the future generation and to have the ability to enjoy the dolphins. And he won the case. So what I'm trying to say is that I think the world has changed so much that governments will have to be prepared for many similar approaches, and similar legal suits against them for damaging the environment. And I think that humanitarian organizations are also starting to realize this. You may be aware of the Vaccine Alliance that is co-led by Oxfam, and it's about raising the alarm bells on vaccine inequity. There have been communities that have, and humanitarian organizations that have supported communities to sue the governments in terms of land use and how risks were built with that. Even in my country, there's a hot debate now around the recent floods. So yes, the answer is it's not just humanitarian organizations, it's actually helping people. Humanitarian organizations and others can help communities and people take up these suits and exert their rights to safety and security.
Any last question to Dr. Jamila? Please.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for the opportunity and on this last chance for question. I just want to confirm something to Professor, because what I addressed from your presentation is that we are in the phase of crisis about the climate change and humanitarian crisis. And from my understanding, all of this problem is already happened because of one major problem is that our dependency on natural resources is basically what caused all of this problem. That's what motivated us to explore more of our mother nature by not paying attention about the climate change and the unfair way of exploiting our nature also caused the humanitarian crisis, such as migrant crisis and so many conflict in many other developing countries, which is hike of natural resources. I just want you to confirm my understanding whether this one cause that I've mentioned is the correct issue that we have to pay attention in order for us to at least reduce the effect of climate change and humanitarian crisis. Thank you very much.
Terima kasih. I absolutely agree with you. And I think that deforestation, environmental degradation have been one of the major drivers, but also transportation, right? Biofuel, petroleum and the use of petrol-based fuel has been one of the major drivers as well. So how do we now reverse this? Is this reversible? And I think yes, to an extent. I think that what we need to do is, again, the advocacy from young people. You know, this is the world you are going to inherit, you are inheriting and you are going to be leading in. People like me have an expiry date, right? So it's how do you protect now and rebuild that forest cover? How do you switch to non-petrol based fuel transportation or other needs? So there are a couple of initiatives you may have heard about: the ecological trading, financial trading, which means that we can encourage governments that still have forests to stop deforestation, but that is offset by paying them to protect those forests. Is one. The other, of course, is how do we move away from energy dependent on fuel? So the electrification of vehicles, better public transport, less use of plastics, biodegradable industries, rising and so forth. Now, it's very easy to blame the governments, but I think let's be honest and ask ourselves, are we also contributing? If you and I use things like Shopee or Tokopedia and all these other online places that we, instinctively buy things cheap from, you realize it comes with massive packaging. There's so much consumption issues, overbuying things that we don't really need, goods that are meant to be obsolescent, like phones, people changing their phones all the time. These things end up, in landfills and leak out all sorts of dangerous chemicals as well, elements as well. The other thing, of course, is wastage of food. 40% of food ends up in landfills. And when it goes to landfills, it doesn't just end there. It emits methane, which is harmful, much more harmful than CO2. The meat industry, for example, I always ask this quiz question: how much water do you need to produce one Big Mac burger? And the answer you get is about 5,000 liters, which is ridiculous. It's about, how you need to set up the grazing land, how you have to feed the cows with so much grass, how much methane the cows produce. So it's our consumption patterns. So I want all of you to rethink, how do you reduce your own carbon footprint? And then how do you raise the alarm bells? How do you push governments, your local, your schools, your workplaces to change? So until and unless at an individual level we commit to change, I don't think we have a legitimacy to blame it on everything on the government or authorities. So I will tell you my personal journey, right? About 3 years ago, I think I stopped taking meat. I plant my own vegetables. I try my best not to take transport to work. So I try to work from home. I am trying to buy an electric vehicle. I am also have solar panels on my house. I do a rainwater collection system. So these are small things that I'm trying to do myself because I don't feel I have the right to complain until I myself take some measures. So I would encourage all of you to rethink how you want to lead your life, right? That you become also a person who supports reduction in greenhouse gas emissions.
Let's give the big applause to Dr. Jamila. I always enjoy her speech, especially I might borrow some words from her, like, you are the future generation. So this is the name of the camp is the youth leadership, because I will retire in about 10 years. So our future depends on you. So thank Dr. Jamila's the sharing. I think you can find more information about Jamila from her Facebook or from her Instagram. The next speaker for this morning is the CEO of the Buddhism Tzu Chi Charity Foundation, Mr. Yan Bo-wen. Mr. Yan is the CEO of Taiwan-based Buddhism Tzu Chi Charity Foundation. While the foundation is most well known for its global disaster and the poverty relief effort, which has been already reached over 126 countries and regions around the world, is also one of the most greatest forces for environment protection in Taiwan. With 8,000 recycling stations and environmental education centers, over 100,000 recycling volunteers around Taiwan and the world. Ms. Yan took up the position of the CEO as the foundation in 2017. After 5 years as the CEO of the United Microelectronics Corporation, let's welcome Mr. Yan Bo-wen and his presentation today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Lee, for your introduction. And honored guests and students, good morning, everyone. So today, the topic I'm going to share is Mission for Sustainable Future. I'd like to share with you something about the world leaders, how they perceive the top risks facing the world. And then I will share you the Tzu Chi's way regarding the climate actions, also the environmental protection, educations. And then I'd like to bring you your attention to think about what we can do together to come out with ideas and solutions to tackle these issues. Each year, in a very beautiful ski resort, Davos in Switzerland, there is a World Economic Forum will be held in the January, second half of the January. And in 2020, that is just on the verge of coronavirus outbreak. So lots of people attended, about 3,000 participants from 117 countries attended this economic forum. especially the United States. They have more than 600 people attended. And in the midst of this economic forum, they did a survey. So what is a global issue will be key in 2020. 60% of the participants elected the climate change, like a previous speakers touched. The climate change is the most risks in this world. And there was a global risks report every year will be published in about the same time frame of the economic forum. So in 2021, the global risks concluded in 2 words is fractured future. So structural features exacerbated by the crisis to make recovery deeply uneven. So as we can see, the digital inequality, youth disillusionment, social cohesion erosion. That is all the social behavior we can perceive. So in this report, they divided up by 5 categories, including economic, environmental, geopolitical, societal, and technological. So if we can check the 2 axes by likelihood and y-axis is by impact. The upper right corner represent the higher risks. If we zoom in, those are factors in the upper right corner, then we can see the top 4 risks are, the first one is climate change, climate action failure. The second one is infectious diseases. The third one is biodiversity loss. The fourth is environmental damage. So we can see the environmental factor accounts for the top 3 of the top 4 global risks. So this year, this is just published a few days ago. The global risk for this year, concluded in the 2 words, is worlds apart. So they perceive a divergent recovery in this world. This is pretty much follow a fractured trajectory of last year. And we can see the increasing polarization and resentment in this world. And among these 5 categories, as you can see in this table, the top 3 risks are all concerning the environmental issues. The climate action failure, same as last year. Extreme weather, biodiversity loss is among the top 3. And we pay attention to the infectious diseases go down to 6th place. And you can see that the climate crisis still the biggest long-term threat facing humanity. The natural disaster by global warming is getting serious. Like this, you can see that extinctions, flooding, glaciers shrinking, food shortage threats, coral bleaching, death rate higher, storm diversification, security, refugee, degraded environmental, pest incidents, war and violence, heat wave, wildfire, sea level rise, allergies, hurricanes, downfall, disease, air quality, glacier melting, water shortage, shifting, and warmer. Those are all disasters coming from global temperature rise. And I would not say that's all natural disasters. Some are actually man-made disasters. So since a few years ago, the people are more activated to promoting the climate change, climate emergency, climate crisis. And in 2019, the IPCC from UN addressed the scientists think 100% of global warming is due to humans. And the New York Times comments that the warming makes part of the planet less and less livable. The epic climate migration has begun. In the Time magazine, in August issue, the cover story addressed the 2020 is the defining year for the planet. So lots of comments follows. 2020 is our best chance to save the planet. Last year, in June timeframe, the Secretary General of UN, Antonio Guterres, comments on climate change. We are coming to a point of no return. He's concerned the richest nations has pumped billions more into fossil fuels than clean energy since the pandemic. That is the opposite way to mitigate the climate change issue. In the IPCC AR report, the sixth assessment report just coming out. That is a working group 1, only the part 1. This group is physical science-based. The AR5 published 7 years, it's actually 8 years ago, 8 to 9 years ago. So this is a very important report. From this report, they have 5 scenarios projecting the future. So including the SSP 1 to 5. The SSP stands for Shared Social Economic Pathway. The SSP 1 is most optimistic one. In the 2050 is close to near net zero carbon emission. And SSP 5 is most pessimistic one. Will generate about twice carbon emission than that of 2015. So as you can see that for the most optimistic one, still will exceed the global surface temperature will exceed 1.6 Celsius. And for the most pessimistic one will reach 2.4 degrees Celsius. What is the cause of the global warming? This is from NASA. We are now in 2021, 2022, already reached 1.18 degrees Celsius, compared with the global surface temperature before the Industrial Revolution. And as you can see in the right-hand side, the chart in the right-hand side, the main cause of the global surface temperature rise is due to man activities, humans' activities. Please note that the global surface temperature maybe you will see that, just 1 to 2 degrees C higher rise than before. But you need to pay attention that because the ocean covers 70% of this, the global surface, the planet surface. So the global land surface temperature is much higher than sea. So when we say the global temperature rise 1.5 degrees Celsius, it means inland could reach above 2 degrees C, 2 point something. So when we reach to 2 degrees C, then in some piece of land might reach to 3 to 4 degrees C. That is very serious. And this is to give you a very quick snapshot about Tzu Chi Charity Foundation. Tzu Chi is in Chinese is Tzu Chi, but in English is direct translation is Tzu means compassion, Ji means relief. We have over 600 offices or points in 66 countries across the 5 continents. And the Tzu Chi's charity relief reach out to 126 countries and areas. And we have about 1 million volunteers around the world, and 10 million supporters and donors around the world. And in the past 56 years, we have been built a school in 60 countries, over 240 schools. Many of them are Catholic, Islamic schools or churches or mosques. None of them are Buddhism. Tzu Chi is Buddhism organization, but we built a school for the other religions. And the permanent home, we built more than 21,000 units in 15 countries. We also do the free clinic. In the past 50 years, we have done more than 70,000 free clinics in 57 countries. And more than 3 million persons have been benefited. And this is one of the most valuable assets of Tzu Chi Foundation is our recycling volunteers. Yeah, we have 110,000 Tzu Chi recycling volunteers around the world. And you can tell from their faces, yeah, they are very happy and energetic. They are deeply inspired by our master about 30 years ago to encourage our volunteer using their applauding hands to do the recycling. And they are encouraged by master, saying that you see that hospital doctors, medical professionals, they take care of the people. And our recycling volunteers, they take care of the earth. They are also the doctor. So I would say the best long-term care from Tzu Chi's model is the do recycling. So most popular sharing from our recycling volunteers, they tell master that they will do the recycling until the last breath. They don't need a long-term care. They want to take care of other people. So we have many recycling stations in 18 countries and regions. And since 1990, Taiwan Tzu Chi recycling volunteer has reduced about 300 million tons of CO2 emission. And Tzuji's environmental education, Tzuji's model, we have something unique. I call it two circulations. One is circular economy, the other is circular education. Our volunteers, they collect those recyclable materials, then they sort it into different materials, and we make clean and make it become a component of those materials. And we have Da'ai technology yacht and Jinsi technology to make it become eco products. Like the jacket, t-shirts, pants I'm wearing now is made of PET bottles. And we use this revenue to do the charity, go to the charity purpose, to support our Da'ai TV station, to promote, to broadcast, to disseminate those goodness of the people. So that is two circulations. One is circular economy, the other is circular education. This is one of the examples that our Da'ai technology company, the more than 1,000 eco products has been launched. And one of the most popular one is blanket. We use this blanket to do the international disaster relief. Like this is a campfire in California. We distribute those blankets. It's very popular. And also we have a wood plastic composite. That is to reduce with deforestation. The tree, preserve the trees. And the other Jinsi technology is from trash to treasure. We have this so-called multiple purpose foldable bed. That's also coming from recycled plastics. And this product has awarded the Red Dot Design Award in 2014. And as you can see in the lower picture, lower photos, it can be, in some special cases, it also can be used for temporary hospital bed, like this photo. And we have also launched two mobile environmental education truck. We used two 40-feet containers and equipped those interactive education game for the students. So already in Taiwan, we have already more than 60,000 students already visited this mobile environmental education truck. And we also work together with the Coco Foundation. This is a talking gorilla. And this gorilla, she learned about 2,000 vocabularies. So she can use sign language to express her concern on environmental issues. That is also very impressive. We also work with Pagemo. This is e-gaming, e-sports gaming, and the purpose of this gaming is to do the environmental education and also disaster prevention educations. This is work with National Taiwan University. The Professor Ye Bin-chen uses Pagemo platform. And it's very popular right now. Is we are campaigning and getting more attraction from the students, elementary students around Taiwan. Besides, I'd like to introduce two kind of a concept of Tzu Chi has been strongly advocated this circular economy. Compared with linear economy, this we take, make, and dispose. And circular economy, we addressed, emphasize on repurpose, reuse, recycle. And we use renewable energy, renewable. Like this way, if we also advocate the 5R, the source management. If we live do our life as usual, like a linear economy, then it's go this way, and lots of waste were produced among the process. And we address the, we need to refuse first. If we cannot refuse, then we can reduce the amount of the material we use. Then go to the bottom side is try to reuse or repair before go to the recycle. So the last and the least is recycle. So though we are encouraging people to do the recycle, but recycling is the last and least solution to do. Before that, we can do refuse, reduce, repair, and reuse. That is 5R spirit. And this is Tzu Chi is a very active participant in many of UN's specialized agency activities, platform, forum, etc. So we work with, we have partnered with 21 specialized agency and international NGOs. We are addressing since 2003. So we are focusing 5 areas: climate action, environmental protection, refugee relief, and interfaith dialogue and administrative. And for example, in this COVID-26, in this October 2021, and Tzu Chi, we sent 16 representatives around the world attended this meeting. And we organized and sharing presentation in 4 meetings and 9 press conferences. We are addressing the youth in climate sustainability, interfaith dialogue, the pathway to decarbonization, climate and nature, and healthy and food system. We also work with some very good young social enterprise in Taiwan, like a 5% design action. And we also, like the photo said, President Tsai also attended this meeting. And we also work with UN Youth Co-Lab. Tzu Chi hosted 2 workshops. And this is young youth movers on climate actions. And from there are more than 200 youth from 21 countries participated in these 2 workshops. And we also have a very innovative program called the Vision Future. We're providing the annual grant for young, innovative social enterprise or teams to support them to focus on a charitable purpose. And since this is 5th year, and in the past 4 years, we accepted 44 incubation teams to help them to develop the business in line with the SDGs. And the social impact of this program is gaining more traction. So our Facebook fan page already reached more than 6 million visitors. So 2021 reflection is, I guess you will note that we are facing through the very difficult timing, the coronavirus pandemic and some wars, Afghan refugee free. So I'd like to quote the Charles Dickens, his book, A Tale of Two Cities. It was the best times, it was the worst times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. It was season of light, it was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope, it was winter of despair. There are something we need to think about. The Earth is 4.6 billion years old. If our planet Earth's history was compressed in 24 hours, we human beings has been here for just 2 minutes. An industrial revolution began just 1 second ago. However, in this 1 second time frame, we have destroyed more than 50% of world's forest. We consume more than 70% of the resources of this planet. So our sustainability trend to drive the business, there is a threat, there is a hope, there is opportunities. And this give you some ideas what is a trend and threat and opportunity. The impact of climate change goes global. The rising social inequality and in disengagement. The increasing pressure on natural resources. Natural resources is getting more limited. The rise of city-level states. Technology-driven innovation disrupts societies and industries. Government is getting more active looking into private sector to deliver on Paris Agreement and SDGs. Businesses perceive sustainability as an opportunity, especially on renewable technology. Collaboration is keen. So this is not a time for far apart. It's time to collaboration. So I'd like to use the Bill Gates, his Gates notes, how to avoid a climate disaster. I think this is very helpful for us. The carbon emission by country, the top 4 is China, United States, and India. And if the cattle in this world is a country, Republic of Cattle, then you'll be in the 3rd place. So electricity accounts for 25% of carbon emission. Agriculture is 24%. Manufacturing is 21%. Transportation is 14%. Now, these are top 4. However, animal agriculture accounts for 14.5%. That is a little bit higher than transportation. So you can go through the plant-based diet, and that will be very helpful to reduce the carbon emission. And countries and corporates, more and more countries and corporates committed to the carbon neutral goal, or net zero alliance, net zero coalition. So there are only 2 countries are carbon negative, the Bhutan and Suriname. And more and more countries, they committed to fulfill that the net zero carbon emission by 2050. And Taiwan is among them. So in closing, the Tzuji's way or Tzuji's model, we believe that action is better than words. So our environmental strategy is we encourage people to do recycling and also the 5R, education. And our master encourage people to live in simple lifestyle and make sure we have responsible consumption to reduce the waste and energy and also the pollution. And we encourage people to take the plant-based diet. This is the best and most cost-effective and the simplest solution for all, not for human beings, but for all beings. And Tzuji would like to join take the active action on net zero emission. And we need to go through, not only reduce, we need to go through carbon neutrality, like a planting, and we would like to work with all those scientific researchers to looking for the carbon capture technology. And this is all I have for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, CEO Yan, for his sharing. So from the floor, any comment or question to CEO Yan? I think like Jamina, CEO Yan also emphasized simple life from ourselves to protect our future. So any comment or questions? Please.
I wanted to thank you for your presentation, and I really admire all the steps that Tzuji is taking towards educating people about the environment and being environmentally active and sustainable. I know you mentioned that Tzuji emphasizes we should reuse and repair things. And I was wondering, you gave some great examples of how Tzuji has emphasized recycling and implemented it in many ways. Do you have any specific programs or ways that you have emphasized reusing and repairing things and getting the community, especially in Taiwan, to do that?
Yeah, we have many senior volunteers. They are like our deputy CEO, Mr. Zhang Jiduo. Yeah, we actually they are very experienced on those areas. Yeah, like know how to. Yeah, we also have above masters in Hualien. They are actually practice the very simple lifestyle, and we have some materials we can share, and also we have a Da'ai technology yard for those their president, Mr. Li Dimin, the president of Da'ai Technology Company. He normally do more than 2,000 presentations a year. Yeah, every day he would like to share that those on the 5R or how Tzuji turn those recycled material into the eco products, and we have many that kind of. If you like, I can connect you with our deputy CEO, Mr. Zhang, and also the president of Da'ai Technology Yacht, Mr. Li. Yeah, I believe we would like to share. So am I answering your question? Okay.
If you have time, you can go outside. There is a gift shop. Many products from that company. Then you can realize how they used kind of within a PET bottle to make a different kind of the products. Amazing. Even the pencil and the ball pen you have as a souvenir is a product from the company. Yes. And I remember one PET bottle to produce one ball pen. Okay, any other questions? Oh, I see someone raise hand.
Hello, sir. while I was here for the past 3 days, I just noticed that most of the volunteers are, how do you say this, matured, seasoned, and maybe of age. Does that concern you much? And my follow-up question is that, how do you consider youth mobilization? Do you have like youth affiliates, youth groups that will join you to encourage more youth people to join the organization and participate more in your activities?
Yeah, thank you for your question. Yes, indeed. Yeah, we do have most of our volunteers. They are aged, pretty seniors, and that is also one of our concern. So we launch lots of activities. We try to connect the young people to join this. Not only the environmental protection, but also we have many. We have so-called one organization is we call it the compassion technology, and we attract some young talent youth. They can join us, focus on those like a DAI, technology, and also we also do some medical purpose, medical long-term care technology. So that is something we can attract young people to join this our organization. And we also have lots of activity, interact with like I just addressed the United Nations. Like Tzu Chi is an observer of UNEP, environmental program. And we also work with UNHCR, many platforms which we can have more young talents and to join and to work together. That is, of course, if you see that the many senior aged volunteers, they are doing those logistics. They are trying to support people. Yeah, that is what they can do now. But we actually have many other activities. We can have more talents, young talents, to come to join us. Yeah.
So we have the last question from the floor.
Okay. Good morning, and thank you for your presentation. I can observe that Chi Foundation is working together with Taiwan's government. And my question is, do you have some big influences in Taiwan's cooperation with other countries? And if yes, can you give me some examples, please?
We have because Tzu Chi is we have many connections with through the UN or INGO, international NGOs. We also for example, during this coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic, so we have done PPE, support, personal protective equipment support to 96 countries and areas in just 2 years. So actually, we work with many organizations and countries, or the interface, different religions, like a Catholic, like Islamic organizations, to do that PPE relief. And also, Master also noticed that that during this, many countries they are suffering the lockdown, and in many areas they're short of the necessity, food. We also do the economical relief. In the past 2 years, we have done the relief in 44 countries and areas. So we actually work with many organizations. So in the past 2 years, our PPE sent to more than 8,000 institutes around the world. So we work many. You can, if you are interested in specific area, then we can connect you those. Especially, I'm not sure which country you are from, but Haiti. Yeah, we actually in Haiti. There is an earthquake last year, and our volunteers in the United States, we have been there and working with partner with the local the fathers, Catholic organization. We do the distribution, the rice and some necessities, daily life necessities distribution last year. And we also work with the UNHCR, and we donate 100,000 US dollars for this organization to help the children in Haiti. So that is what we have done already.
Okay, let's give big applause to CEO Yan for his sharing about Tzu Chi recently. But actually, if you received the Pfizer BNT in Taiwan, Tzu Chi and with the other 3 private companies donated in total 50 million doses of Pfizer BNT to Taiwan. So solve a lot of problems. I think we should own him and Tzu Chi a big applause for their good doing. Wow, so many sharing. That is a good opportunity to learn the different type of the charity. And the last speaker for the morning, the speaker is Joseph Martin, Director of Center for Excellency in Disaster Management and Humanitarian Assistance. Mr. Martin is the Director of the CFEDM on Fort Island, Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. He directs training, education, applied research, regional civil-military coordination, and the crisis support during disaster in support of U.S. Indo-PACOM Command. With worldwide responsibility, he was appointed to the Senior Executive Services in October 2016 upon resuming the duty as the Center Director. He previously served as the Director of CFDM from May 2014 to June 2016, while on the active duty as the U.S. Air Force Colonel. Mr. Martin was commissioned through the ROTC as distinguished graduate in the U.S. Air Force in 1998, after having completed bachelor degree in mathematics from the University of California, Riverside. Then he has early services in the Air Force for the 27 years. Let's welcome Director Martin and his sharing today. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to join you virtually today. On behalf of the United States Indo-Pacific Command, I would like to thank our friends at the National Science and Technology Center for Disaster Reduction and the Tzu Chi Foundation for hosting this workshop. It is an honor to speak today, along with Dr. Jemalia Mahmood and Mr. Po Wen Yen of the Tzu Chi Foundation. I had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Mahmood in person in Geneva several years ago when she was with the IFRC. I deeply regret that she, myself, and Mr. Po Wen Yen cannot meet with all of you in person today. To the students and other participants, should our paths cross in the future, please introduce yourself to me, as these engagements are critical to building and sustaining resilience across the region. For those of you not familiar, the Center for Excellence in Disaster Management and Humanitarian Assistance, which I lead, is a U.S. Department of Defense organization. We were established by the U.S. Congress in 1994, and we report directly to U.S. Indo-Pacific Command here in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Though our immediate focus is the Indo-Asia Pacific, we do have a global mandate. This means we draw insights and lessons from humanitarian assistance and disaster response missions and crises across the world and partner with governmental, non-governmental organizations, the United Nations, and Red Cross humanitarians across the globe. We provide training, insights, and analysis to our own military. But perhaps even more importantly, we build the capacity of our allies, friends, and partner militaries and civilian authorities to improve their own capabilities in humanitarian assistance and disaster response, as well as to improve their ability to work with and receive support from the United States. I really love this photo. So as a center and in support of U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, we're especially excited about the work we have been doing with Taiwan over the last year. This past August, we partnered with NCDR, the Taiwan Coast Guard, and the Taiwan National Fire Agency to deliver training for disaster managers in the Republic of Palau as part of the United States Navy's annual Pacific Partnership humanitarian missions throughout the region. We've also enjoyed working with Taiwan and Japan on the humanitarian assistance and disaster relief component of the Global Cooperation and Training Framework, or GCTF, as well as organizing subject matter expert exchanges for disaster managers as part of Taiwan's annual Min-On exercise. In 2022, we plan to continue our partnership with Taiwan to include this event. We look forward to heading back to Palau with NCDR and others from Taiwan's disaster management and public health sectors this coming July, and to again contribute to the Min-On events this spring. To the students assembled here, I look forward to learning from your presentations later this morning. Your theoretical and practical work this weekend on shelter management is especially important, not only when a disaster like an earthquake occurs, but also in response to the impacts of climate change. And climate change is what I'd like to spend the balance of my time talking to you about today, particularly how the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command views the threat from a warming planet, the impacts we see today, and what actions we are taking to confront this threat. I want to be clear up front that as far as U.S. Indo-Pacific Command is concerned, there is no debate about the reality of climate change. Climate change is very real and very much here. As the U.S. Interim National Security Strategy recognized, and I quote, "Climate change is one of the most significant threats the country and the Department of Defense faces." The slide you see here is not my own, but taken from an August 2021 report by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change from the United Nations. And it shows both projected surface temperature changes in the shaded areas, but more importantly, the observed data in the black line. I am neither a climate denier nor a climate activist. I was a math and statistics undergrad, so I simply like numbers and facts. I'm here to share this scientific, measurable observation, but there are many more. For example, in the past 10 years, an astounding 83% of all disasters triggered by natural hazards were caused by extreme weather and climate-related events. Trends are for continued global warming and intensifying impacts of climate change for the next 20-plus years. As climate change causes temperatures to rise, the warming atmosphere will hold more moisture, leading to more rain, making floods, like those occurring right now in Malaysia, more common. Because most of the heat gained by the planet as a result of climate change is stored in oceans, typhoons, which we all know are energized by the heat in the oceans, will intensify too. In fact, the latest report from the UN's IPCC report found that the proportion of typhoons in categories 3, 4, and 5 has increased significantly over the past 40 years. There is also general consensus in the scientific community that these changes are attributable to human activity and exacerbated by the resultant changes to atmospheric gases, particularly carbon dioxide. Another measure that is not within dispute are the major international contributors to greenhouse gases, as captured on this slide for the US, China, and for reference only, Taiwan. This slide really does speak for itself, but in the interest of full disclosure, I want to reiterate that I work for the United States Department of Defense. Even though the US military has reduced its greenhouse gas emissions by more than 15% since the early 2000s, the US military is the single largest organizational contributor to greenhouse gases in the world. If the United States Department of Defense were its own country, it would rank in the top 60 amongst nation polluters. That is another reason why the Department of Defense continues to take this so seriously. As stated, I was a math and statistics undergrad, so I pulled a second chart, which some would use to defend their positions as a lower per capita contributor. And that is true. In this case, the industrialized nature of all three example countries blended with a wide variance of populations in the denominator, can be used to tell a modestly different story. But the chart also shows some distinct patterns in stabilization, reduction, as well as a persistent increase in per capita contributions, which cannot be denied. The bigger question from our perspective is not debating the reality of climate change, but understanding what the impacts climate change will have. To better understand these relationships, INDOPACOM has developed this framework for looking at the interconnected impacts of climate change. Allow me to go left to the right on this chart for an explanation. The left-hand box, titled Climate Facts, are simply those things which are measurable. As mentioned before, I like numbers, and each of these can be measured and has been measured over time. Historical data and current measures exist for data ranging from sea and air temperatures all the way to the reduction in glaciers and ice cap melting. Climate facts express themselves in the next box, climate impacts, in which changes in sea level rise, as well as changes to things like desertification, extreme temperatures in different areas, as well as potentially more flooding and droughts, or even flooding and droughts in places in which it did not occur before. Truthfully, none of this really matters until humans are involved. The box in the middle, called Human Security Impacts, talks about these things and the impact that climate change has on food production, infrastructure destruction, and in many cases, changes to fishery patterns and migration, which can lead to significant economic and social issues for certain countries. It is really in the box entitled State Security Impacts, in which we see these impacts in things like conflict over resources, and in certain particularly low-lying countries, the existential threat to coastal cities, and in some cases, entire nations. The final box on the right side discusses warfighter impacts. Changes are near certain in how often and when military forces will be called to respond. In many countries across the Indo-Pacific, specifically, the military is the primary disaster response force, and every time you're out there responding, you are not training. And there are opportunities for damage to facility locations as well as equipment, which further can reduce military readiness. Not surprisingly, as a Department of Defense entity, our primary focus here at INDOPACOM is on the state security and warfighting impacts of changes that I've outlined here with the black box. Where are the state security risks to be aware of? Well, certainly, Taiwan is at no risk of dissolving as a result of climate change. But what about other nations around you or within your collective circle of critical diplomatic partners? As assistance and influence opportunities present themselves, the effect and impact of climate change on state security cannot be overstated. I want to expand just a bit on the warfighting impacts portion, and this is where my team here in Hawaii is completely focused for Indo-Pacific Command. These 4 challenges are all directly related to warfighter readiness and are the current focus of our program. So for instance, more frequent and/or more severe weather events may require substantial involvement of the Department of Defense assets in humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. Sea level rise and temperature change may adversely impact navigation safety, damage port facilities, and even cooperative security locations. However, climate change can and does also generate potential for conflict. In Syria, for example, a drought between 2006 and 2009 led to a loss of wheat independence, extreme loss of livestock, and the internal movement of thousands of farmers into the already underprepared urban areas. Discontentment with a lack of opportunity in government services ensued, which led to the civil war starting in 2011. That conflict led to mass migration, with over 3 million Syrians still not having returned home. Closer to home, we see one of the greatest potential human security impacts in the greater Mekong region. Temperatures there have risen between 0.5 and 1.5 degrees Celsius in the past 50 years and continue to rise. More frequent and severe droughts and floods are already causing extensive damage to property and loss of life. The most recent models suggest continued warming, increased climate variability, and more frequent and damaging extreme weather patterns such as droughts, floods, and high-intensity tropical storms. Wetter rainy seasons are expected to lead to increased flooding, and drier dry seasons will exacerbate water shortages. Add to that upstream dams from Laos and China, and you have the potential for human insecurity, state insecurity, and a valid potential for conflict either internal or external to the immediate area. Another area of human security concern is the low-lying Pacific Islands. As the U.S. Secretary of Defense Austin stated, in the far reaches of the Pacific, rising sea levels and more frequent and intense storms put individuals, families, and whole communities at risk while pushing the limits of our collective capacity to respond. Challenges to shelter, food security, and livelihoods on these islands could result in mass migration now and years to come. With these challenges in mind, this past June, CFEDM was appointed by the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command Commander, Admiral Aquilino, to lead the Climate Change Impact, or CCI, program. The goal of the program is to identify relevant risks and at-risk locations, provide assessments of climate change impacts, and execute improvement programs on behalf of the command. We're realistic about our role. CCI is not trying to solve climate change. Our aim is to be a source of information and knowledge about the impacts of climate change on security in its area of responsibility, and to serve as a focal point for collaboration with allies and partners, like those in this room, to address these impacts and enhance regional security. Although impacts are global, the principal actors in addressing the impacts of climate change are sovereign nations, each of which has competing interests for resources and different levels and kinds of vulnerabilities to the impact of climate change. Climate change impacts do not respect national borders, and some would argue that failure to collaborate can itself become a threat to regional stability and security. CFEDM and the Climate Change Initiative seeks this collaboration. To conclude, I want to acknowledge that the issue of climate change can be daunting, even depressing. But as I look across the Indo-Pacific region, I am optimistic. Fewer people are dying as a result of disasters, early warning is improving almost everywhere, and partners like Taiwan are playing an increasing role in building capacity of states in the region like Palau. The Taiwan Can Help motto that you have adopted and exported is, I think, a good frame of mind to approach climate change. I am hopeful that the students in this room can not only learn to shelter those impacted by disasters, but will also take a lead in building back better, more resilient housing into the future. Allow me to close with a brief story about starfish. A young girl was walking along a beach upon which thousands of starfish had been washed up during a terrible storm. When she came to each starfish, she would pick it up and throw it back in the ocean. People at the beach watched her with amusement. She had been doing this for quite some time when a man approached her and said, "Little girl, why are you doing this? Look at this beach. You can't save all these starfish. You can't make a difference." The girl seemed crushed, suddenly deflated. But after a few moments, she bent down, picked up another starfish, and hurled it as far as she could into the ocean. Then she looked up at the man and replied, "Well, I made a difference for that one." So here's my advice. Take what you've learned from this program and others and go make a difference in the world. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to the Q&A session.
Thank you, Director Martin. I really love the story of starfish. Yes, we can make the change, even though it's a small change. So any comment or question to Director Martin from the floor? Let me explain. Our program this time, we emphasize shelter management. It's maybe a few days after. But Director Martin, they can coordinate military power to do some search and rescue operation. So I think you should pay attention to one word he mentioned. Military and civil coordination is also a very important factor when we have the severe disaster. If no question, I will ask first one to Director Martin. Director Martin, during your career, what's this major challenge between the civil and the military coordination? Director Martin, are you still online? You also see the picture I took with the Director Martin in Palau last year. Hey, Director Martin, welcome back. Did you pick up my questions?
I did, thank you.
Okay, please.
So One of the more interesting parts of having spent, almost 27 years in the military, was I got to live in, I don't know, 10 or 12 different countries, traveled all over the place, and found myself encountering a wide range of interactions between the military and civilians. I imagine in the room with the students there that the relationship between your militaries and your civilian-led agencies varies just as much as what I saw. When I moved to the disaster management function that I have now, I was fascinated to see the interaction between militaries and the humanitarian civilian agencies. So in drawing a parallel now to the climate change activities, is the military does, both the US military and others, have a responsibility and a piece of the climate change challenge and the security challenges. And I think that if the civilian side has a better understanding of the military's role, and the military has a better understanding of its responsibilities as part of the larger society, then that is sort of the civil military nexus of learning that I think would be incredible. Thank you.
Thank you. So, please.
Oh. Hello, sir. Yeah, I'm from the Philippines, and Philippines and US has been good friends ever since. But I would like to ask you a question because you're sending militaries, right? You're reinforcing militaries. And then sometimes people have the notions that militaries are the war guys, but these are the different type of militaries. These are the type of militaries that respond to relief, respond to disasters, and like that. So, sir, how do you handle these kinds of comments from other people that, how do you mitigate these kinds of ill feeling or maybe negative feeling towards your troopers?
That's a great question, and I've thoroughly enjoyed all of the encounters in particular that I've had in the Philippines. It's very difficult because oftentimes military forces may or may not contemplate their effect on civilians when they engage in that area. And I'll use an example. So the United States Marines are an incredible and very, very capable force to go out and work security issues on behalf of the United States. But they also have a significant role in the Pacific in being the first responders to disasters. So we actually spend a significant amount of time every year training the United States Marines in Okinawa so that if they go back to the Philippines like they did in Hainan in 2013 or to Nepal in 2015, that they don't go in with the military bravado of conquest. It's the military capacity to provide assistance. That's very interesting for us, and I will use the Philippine example, is we have actually taught our programs at the Philippine Command and Staff College and worked with OCD, which the Office of Civil Defense, for those who aren't familiar with the way the Philippines are arranged, in order to teach that as well to the Philippine military so that they can sustain or develop that better relationship with their civilian agencies.
Any last question to Director Martin? Director Martin, if you have little time, could you explain to our audience about the Indo-PACOM? Because I think to the young generation, Indo-PACOM is quite a very fresh name to them.
Sure. So in its simplest terms, the United States is a very large country. We have interests going back, since our foundation that have a global look to them and have been tried to be good allies and partners with lots of people over the centuries. The challenge, though, is that you can't manage it all at once. So the U.S. military is divided up into different regions. So Africa is one, Central or Southwest Asia is another, Europe, and then the Indo-Pacific Command runs from and the quote is from Hollywood to Bollywood, so from the west coast of the United States to India, and then from penguins to polar bears. So from Antarctica all the way to the Arctic Circle. So the Indo-Pacific Command is the military unit that oversees that for the U.S. And it's probably, I think it's around 370,000 personnel that work within that space. And by example, about 28,000 of them are stationed in Korea, another 60 or 70, 40, 50,000, I think, maybe in Japan and other places. So the U.S. military is spread out very broadly, and Indo-Pacific Command is one of the functions which manages that. That's who I work for. So it's headed by a 4-star Navy admiral. And I work for him in supporting 2 significant programs. The first is the U.S. military's capacity to respond to disasters and provide assistance to nations within this region. And the second now, which I've been doing since July as well, is how do you look at, from an Indo-Pacific Command perspective, the impacts of climate change, again, on our allies and partners. And there's probably a good 3 or 4 solid examples on that that I could give pretty easily. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Martin. I know you also would like to hear student presentation from 11, if you have time. Please stay on the Zoom. You will see student presentation through the live conference. So let's give the big hand to Director Martin for his sharing. I think from the 3 speakers this morning, they're from the 3 different areas, 3 different organizations, but they all emphasize impact by climate change and how we reduce by our own. So I think we can take it home and think about how we start to reduce greenhouse emissions from ourselves. So thank you very much for the keynote speak section. We will have like a 10 minutes break. So please back to the room at 11. We start sharing from our students. So thank you so much for your attendance for the keynote speak session. Thank you.